Today's video was both easy to make and hard to make. When it comes to loving a board game or loving anything, really defining and separating love versus like can be a little difficult. But then finding those feelings conflicting or different when I think of something now versus back then really makes you actually revisit how you felt before. Now, luckily, I have a YouTube channel where I record most of my opinions on this stuff, so when it comes to board games, I can typically go back and see exactly how I felt about things. That helps me a lot. It might be a little bit more difficult for you. Regardless, I do suggest you try to do something like this too. It really helps when it comes to calling games. It really helps to limit your options on board game night to stuff that you'll actually really enjoy. Alright, now I wanted to make this a little bit more interesting. So as you know, this is my top 10 games that I no longer love, which means that at one point I did love them and now don't. Now, it doesn't mean I don't like these games. It doesn't mean that I'd hate my time playing these games, because I feel I rarely, if ever, flip-flop that much. I don't think I ever have, at least with board games, where I've gone from loving something to hating something. Often, if something's like a TV show or a movie series or something like that, where they progress and continue, you can start to not like what they make new. But with board games, they tend to be physical products that you buy and then are just kind of exist in the same state as they always were. And so it makes it a little bit easier to be like, this is still something I enjoy, I just don't love it anymore. But there's a variety of reasons why I don't love these, and again, to make it more interesting, I decided to order this based off of the average review score they have on BGG. Now, say what you will about BGG, which is Board Game Geek, if you didn't know, or say what you will about the user reviews on BGG, but either way, I thought it might be interesting, so let's take a look. Now, this ranges everywhere from 7.1 to 8. Which is kind of where I think most games are. In fact, one thing I noticed, because I feel the variety of quality gameplay in these, or the amount of quality product on display between these, is much more of a difference between 7.1 and 8. But when you get all the scores out, especially people that just love it or reviewed it when they first got it, when they loved it, just like when I loved it, you get this kind of like middling thing where it kind of all averages out to the 7 to 8 range. Anywhere from, I feel, 7 to 6 point or to 8.5 is actually fairly average, or at least not egregiously terrible or absolutely amazing. But of course, everybody's opinion is different, which is why it's all on average. Anyway, I could get into that. I'm not going to. It's a fun way to do it. So, starting out with number 10. Now, before I go any further, of course, a big shout out to Into the AM. They're always linked down below. They're not sponsoring today's video specifically, but I am wearing one of their new shirts. As you can see, they are all awesome, amazing. This is actually a large. I normally get a medium, but I'm kind of liking the feel of it a little bit looser, but they still fit really good because of the shape of the shirt and the knitting of it and all that. It's a great quality product. You can save 10% down the link below. Of course, Massive Darkness is number 10. 7.1, definitely the lowest scored, and I feel probably, I don't know if I agree with it being the lowest. I think I would probably put one more as lower than this, perhaps, maybe. But Massive Darkness does go pretty far down. Incidentally, Massive Darkness was my first Kickstarter that actually I backed and delivered. And so, of course, as you're new to gaming, because I got new into gaming based off of my first play with Zombicide at a friend's house. And so with that, then I got into it, and even then I was like watching it, but I didn't really get into it. It was not my first board game, but it was one of my first board games. And I feel like when you first do that, you're limited in like the history, you're limited in what you like versus don't like, or how to see a good product versus a bad product for you, of course. And Massive Darkness, for me, when I first played it, I adored it. I loved it. This is probably the one I flip-flopped the most on. I really liked almost everything about Massive Darkness, the very first one. I adored this game and played it so very much. And so to have it be the first on the list is actually almost perfect. because as I've progressed as a gamer, as I've matured and developed as a board gamer when it comes to what I've experienced and not experienced, what I've played and not played, because back in the day, I used to enjoy playing Clue, and that has roll to move, which is terrible, right? And like, there's a lot wrong with Clue. Now it's fine. It's, I used to play Life and Monopoly and all that, and I thought those were great because I didn't know any better, right? Ignorance is bliss in a lot of ways. The same thing goes with what I feel Mass of Darkness is. I had a lot of fun with it. I enjoyed it a lot. I still don't think it's a bad game because at the end of the day, it's just trying to be fun, and I think it works at being fun. It is not something I would pick off the table to play ever. And in fact, if people wanted to play it, I might say no thank you even. And I feel that's quite a strong fall off on that. I just feel like there's better uses of my time than playing Mass of Darkness. Even just within the board gaming spaces, there are some things outside of board games I'd rather do than play Mass of Darkness. I still think it's a fun game. I would not hate my time with it. It is not something I would ever pick, and I've since given it away, actually. So, I mean, it is what it is. But anyway, that's number 10. Now, number 9, this one's kind of an interesting one. 7.3 on the rating, Street Fighter the Miniatures game. This is something that I really enjoyed because, first of all, my wife and I are big fans of the IP. I really liked the quick setup of it, and I really liked the bluffing mechanic that you can do when you're playing with it. And there's the fact that it all was pre-painted, these big miniatures. It's kind of fun to play around in that way. I liked like some of the modes, like the tag team modes, and the one with like power-ups around and stuff like that. I had a lot of fun with it. It was something that took forever to deliver. It ended up being a great deal, though it like totally like decimated Jasco to deliver it and stuff like that. And there was a lot wrong with it outside of the game itself. And the gameplay, and this is kind of where it fell off, over time, it's just too simplistic. Hopefully that makes sense for a skirmish game, right? I mean, in a lot of ways, it fits Street Fighter in that it's like, these are the mechanics, and this is these two people fighting, and you just play, and then whoever plays better wins kind of thing, right? Like, that's still a thing, and in that case, it's very much on the IP. But for a board game, I've played it quite a bit. I still have it because it is a quick setup game that I can still enjoy. It's all pre-painted. It looks pretty. It's fun. It's almost kind of a collectible, if nothing else. And again, I enjoy it. It's not bad. It's just there's not enough there longevity for me to keep going, if that makes sense. And I think part of that is because unlike a video game, right? You are limited in the card game on what you can do to introduce new mechanics. And so over time, as I played more and more of the characters, I found that Street Fighter, the miniature game, the characters don't feel fundamentally different than in others. Now, I know that whole fundamentally different is a loaded term that I hate when I do reviews, and that's why I typically avoid them. All I can say is it's a feeling you get when you feel like you're doing something that acts very differently from another one. Now, there are different groupings, right? There are some that are more ranged than others, or moving around a lot, or, are stronger, like tougher, I guess I should say, to like hurt and all that. Like, there's a lot of that kind of stuff, and you're doing a lot of that kind of stuff. But then you'll get other characters that also do that kind of stuff. So it's more like groupings of characters and play styles versus having a huge variety. When it comes to a skirmish game, I feel for longevity reasons specifically, you definitely need a lot more of either mechanics at play, but this is just like a pretty much a straight card game, or a big variety of gameplay types where finding this person felt so different than any other. And you kind of need both. And I feel like, at least over time, it just didn't hold up to it. I still enjoy it. I still have this one. So that should kind of give you some clue there. But it definitely is not something I love anymore. It's not something that I just look forward to playing like I did for a long time. This thing sat on my table for quite some time. Quite enjoyed it. Again, it looks pretty too. A lot to like about it. And it's funny that this is now the second lowest, it's 7.3, and it's one of the ones I actually kept. But I think part of it is love of IP, and part of it is just ease of setting up and actually playing a game. You got your deck of cards, you got your mini, you got your board, you're good to go. Go for it. And I think that's kind of nice too. All right, so number 8 here is Reichbusters Project Vril at 7.5. I'm actually surprised this isn't maybe lower. I think a lot of this was delivery hype versus, I think, everything else. I really enjoyed the card combo system in this game. It's just a lot of fun. You have some very strong and powerful turns, and that feeling is so good. It's one of the things board games can really do that a lot of video games don't, because you feel overpowered. I almost want that kind of like Super Saiyan, mode. Or like I've been playing Devil May Cry recently, and they have the Demon Trigger mode, right, where you're like, oh, I turned into a demon. And I've been playing 5 lately, and the Demon Trigger mode there, it's just kind of like you heal a bit more and do a bit more damage, but it's not the Super Saiyan mode I want, right? Where I suddenly get this burst of power that just makes me feel super cool. And afterwards, Conan gives me that, for instance. Reichbusters gave me that, for instance, where you could play and do normal, but there was times where you just felt awesome with these card combos. Loved it. Hated the noise system, hated the setup, hated the rule book, hated a lot of others. So I tend to latch onto the positive of things when they're that good more than the negative. In other words, I'll overlook bad setup for really fun game turns, right? And I think a lot of us will when it comes to board games. Maybe not everything in life. Often people focus on the negative just as human beings. It's what we do. It's how we grow as a species. It's not necessarily even a bad thing. But for board gaming, I feel we do that. Unless it's like a pet peeve, like I can't stand long setup, in which case that kills the whole game for you. And in a way, that kind of did. Well, I was able to overlook it because I enjoyed the gameplay and the hype, and as I was playing it, I enjoyed it. Once I set this game back up on my shelf, it didn't come back, except for like one other time. And what it proved to me is that as fun as that is, it wasn't worth the bad setup rules, the bad rule book that Mythic Games was pretty much famous for at the time, right? Where the storage isn't necessarily great, and sometimes setting up is like almost impossible, and part of the rule book is in a different language. It was a mess. There was a lot of like errata you had to look up, and so once you actually got into it, there's all of these like death by paper cuts almost, but they're not even like not being able to really set up very well isn't, I feel, a paper cut for a board game. That's a bad thing, right? And so that really had me fall out of love, because then obviously I haven't played in a long time. And while I remember, especially going back and watching my old videos and stuff like that, how much I enjoyed those combos and how fun that was, I fell out of love with this based off of like a separation. I realize I'm talking about like an ex-girlfriend here versus Reichbusters, but I hope you get what I'm saying, right? Like once I just was removed from that hype, from those highs, the negatives prevented it from ever coming up, which then gave distance to those hypes and those highs, and in which case now I'm just not into it. And in fact, again, giving it away to the community. And while that's fun, and I hope somebody else enjoys it a lot more, it had too many issues with it, and then it was just too long. All right, next up at 7.6 is Descent Journeys in the Dark. That was the second edition of Descent. Since then, there's been a new version that's very app-driven with a lot of 3D terrain, a lot more like smaller scale missions, but heavier impact on the RPG side of things. There's a lot to be said about Descent from the first edition to second edition to the new edition. In fact, one of the key things is that they are all very different from each other, which is kind of interesting. You like one version and not like another, I feel. Descent 2nd Edition was the very first board game I bought. I've told this story several times about how I got a Magic the Gathering card. It was worth about $200 for in-store credit. I was like, sweet, I like this card, but not worth $200. So I put it in and then had to quickly go to like the Dice Tower and the small smattering of other YouTubers at the time that covered this kind of stuff and look to see what game to get, and Descent won. I spent $200 on Descent buying it, plus like 2 expansions, and then played it with my family more than any other board game for a very long time, until probably, I would say, Massive Darkness arrived, and that was probably then overtook it. But for a long time, this Descent Journeys in the Dark was our game. It's what we played, it's what we loved, it's what we enjoyed, and I loved so much about it. I loved a lot of the scenarios. I loved a lot of the overall journey through things and the different skills you could do, and I loved playing as the Overlord and picking the different like monsters I wanted to use and trapping different chests and stuff like that. It was so fun. It was like being in a D&D game, but with everything organized and controlled. So it was more like a theme park MMO versus a open world, nothing, or, like Minecraft kind of thing. It wasn't the sky's the limit, but you could go to the sky and it's still cool to see, but in a controlled way. And then you came back down to the ground. Now, I guess what I'm saying is that I just really, really enjoyed Descent Journey in the Dark a ton. I really did. It was also, again, early on in my gaming. And I think for some of these, I just overplayed it. I've played so much Descent at this point. At one point, I was running 2 different campaigns, one with my extended family, so like my parents were there, and then one with just my regular family. And then at some point, I even started playing, with just my kids, as my wife was busy doing other things, couldn't always play, but they wanted to play more often. And so, while I have so many great memories of this, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad game, but I think over time, it just wasn't quite as fun because, over time you're doing the same things over and over again. And more importantly, I think the fun factor of this, especially replaying, like the same scenario or whatever, is just lessened. There's not a lot of the like big, oh my gosh, like shout up moments that I live for in board games these days. Again, as I found my taste in board games and what really makes me sit down and play it, that was one of them. So this was one where if it had been more like Solomon Kane, where I can sit down and just enjoy it myself better. Again, it did have the app-based, gameplay, but that was rough. I hated that because for that one, and again, this is second edition, you had to like kind of tell the app every time you're doing something. So I'd be like, roll the dice. Yeah, I killed him. I did this much damage. And the app would be like, okay, he dies. And I'm like, okay. And then I do that. And then I move my guy to the thing. Okay, I want to pick up the treasure chest and tell it to pick up the treasure chest. Oh, it's that. And then I go, okay. And then I get the card. And so it's like I'm having to not only go there, but then I have to go tell the app I went there. And then I had to tell the app I did this and tell the app I did that. And I just had to keep informing the app what I was doing in the physical thing, and it was too detached. It was doubling up on actions. I didn't enjoy that. Didn't play it a whole bunch. So it had to be with people, in which case I want a lot more fun. And I just didn't get the fun factor out of Descent as I did with a lot of others. Plus that miss die. Dear Lord, I hate missing. That's dumb. Missing's stupid. Okay. Moving on from that. So that was number 7. Number 6 is Super Fantasy Brawl. Super Fantasy Brawl is rated at a 7.7, which I think is probably fairly accurate. I think it could probably go a little bit higher up. It depends, again, on how you really rate things, of course. Super Fantasy Brawl is probably one of the best up there, probably one of the 2 or 3 best designed games on this list, I feel, but I still fell out of love with it. Part of it is Mythic games. Like, it just, anytime I see Mythic games, I just get a little bit sad. I don't get angry. I don't get frustrated. I liked almost every game they made. I really did. But there was always either something of an issue, whether it was in the game or outside the game in the campaign, that just really kind of bummed me out. Super Fantasy Brawl doesn't really have that in the game. It's just I feel, a fairly well-made game. The issue I came across is, first of all, I'm just not very good at it. So while it's fun, it has big, chunky miniatures that are a joy to look at and use in this game. The art style's awesome. It's family friendly. I can play with my kids. That's all fun. It's all great. The cards kind of guide you through everything, but playing it well was just something I struggled with. Even after multiple play sessions, it's just not how my brain kind of works. I think I do pretty well in a lot of skirmish games and a lot of like head-to-head games. I think I kind of hold my own fairly okay. I'm not a genius or anything, but I think I do pretty okay. But just the way the combo system worked on Super Fantasy Brawl just had me realize the better turn right after I was done playing. Almost every time. I was like, oh, I should have done that. That would have been way better. And I see that constantly in that game. So part of it's just I don't play it very well. The other part is, again, I just feel variety. When you get team-based games like this, right? So like I have a group, you have a group, you tend to see all the characters fairly quickly. And we did that. And then it's just a combination of characters that changes. And then, of course, that's maybe how the gameplay just goes. This person versus this person versus this person versus this person. But you kind of go through most of their cards, you see most of the people, and so the only thing new is just the interaction between it. It's kind of like if you played Magic the Gathering, but you only had 2 decks and you just played those over and over again. Every now and then you'd see a new card because you didn't get through them all before, but for the most part, the deck operates the way the deck operates, and you kind of see it over and over again. So I think just over time, the combination between me not doing it so well and the combination of seeing most everything after the fact kind of died it down a little bit. Again, added a little bit of Mythic game sadness on there, and I just didn't enjoy it as much as I did the last time I played it, and then I didn't play it ever again. The storage was maybe another thing to bring up slightly, but for the most part, I can look past that. I just had a lot of different containers, kind of silly how it ended up being. But yeah, Super Fantasy Brawl, it just fell out of love with it. Okay, so now we go halfway through the list. Number 5 is the last one I added to this. It was probably the most difficult one I added this, and one that I really had to think about. Okay, what do I mean by love? Both when I did love it versus now. Townsfolk Tussle. Townsfolk Tussle is rated at 7.7, and honestly, I almost hate putting it on this list because I think it's legitimately a good game. I think it's a good product, and I think a lot of people will love it even more than I do, and I do love it. Townsfolk Tussle has a lot of really cool things about it. I really like the roguelike version of it. I think that's a lot of fun. I like the theme of it. I think that's great. The quality of the game, like component-wise, fantastic. It's just really, really good. The game board's, I guess, really, really cool as well, especially when you first start playing with it. But I don't think I love it anymore. So why did I love it? Well, like I said, I liked the roguelike of it. I liked the theme of it. My kids got a big, laugh about it. And I really liked going through it many times over to see the final ruffian and all that kind of stuff. All that's a blast. I think part of the reason I fell out in love with it is just because it can be part of the roguelike thing. While I like it, I like the slow unlocks. I like, progressing through things like that. You can just get really bad deals, and it just kind of sours the whole gameplay a little bit if you go into it and you just have a bad run through it. That can be kind of a bummer. I think more than that, though, and more than the fact that I feel like the terrain doesn't divvy up as much as I'd like, because you see so much of it, because there's like 7 slots that you can have, that over time you kind of see it all. And again, the map doesn't change either, really. Like, the things on it do, but the theme is still like, I'm here in this town fighting this ruffian. I'm here in this town fighting this ruffian. And you're just like, oh, instead of here, I'm over here. But you're still in kind of the same general area. There's not a lot of variety and like visuals on that, of course. And like I said, you see a lot of the terrain right away. But I think the random like death that I feel I get in here is just a bit too much for a board game that I prefer for a boss battler. It's so easy to die within almost a single turn in this game that if you're not on your toes, it can be a little rough. And even if you are, you can just have bad luck and you can kind of then have a bad run. And I don't. When I'm gaming and I get my buddies over or we set aside a whole night for it, we plan for it, just to have that happen can be kind of rough. This game definitely can have you die early on and watch everybody else have fun. You can be the lesson learned for everybody else to, avoid doing that, you'll die. And that ends up killing it for me. And so over time, especially then after seeing the second one, which added a whole lot of really cool stuff, but at the same time, at the end of the day was the same experience I'd had before, which was me watching other people have fun. This kind of killed my love for it. So just more not for me than anything else, but I also wonder how okay I am with that being in a board game. Just the idea that, you could just die and you just are out of the game. I don't like player elimination, pretty much just in general. Which is perfect segue to my number 4, or I guess Board Game Geek's number 4, Rising Sun at a 7.8. We're almost at 8.0 now, guys. These are high-ranked games. These are games that, once we start getting towards the 8, I think are actually considered fairly well. I think Rising Sun, a lot of people's views have died down. Mine died down, I think, a lot before other people, but I also loved this game more than I think a lot of other people did. This was my channel. When I was doing miniature painting, I painted so many Rising Sun minis. It's like not even funny. Like, I painted a ton. I even did some commission painting on them to paint the daimyo, some of the dragons, stuff like that. Just, I loved this game. I lived and breathed this game. And I played a lot with my family, just a whole lot early on. Again, it was kind of earlier on in my board gaming time, and one of the things I don't, it has those boards to kind of hide what you're doing, and that can be kind of fun, but at the same time, I feel whenever I make a blind guess in something, I feel like that's not strategy anymore, right? That's just like gambling almost, right? So if I'm, I think they're going to do this, and then they do this, unless it's something quick and easy like that Street Fighter thing with the kind of the bluffing thing, when it's just like, I'm just, having a lot of fun real quick to it, and I really like the IP of it. And even then, I can't do that too much, right? It's why Senjutsu was kind of a loss for me. And part of that was because of my experience with Rising Sun. And I knew kind of, from early on, that's just not something I like to do. I don't really want to put all my thing on there. Oh, you went with a Ronin or you wanted to die or that. I just, the secret play and trying to make a strategic decision without all the information just kind of hurts for me. It just kind of hurts for me. And so that kind of kills it for me. And I felt like the balance just was never quite there for us. Mainly because, especially at lower player counts, or just depending on your group, if somebody's going for the Shinto stuff, right, and getting all those shrines or whatever it was, again, it's been a while since I've played now. I've given this game away now to one of you guys, which is awesome, of course. But when we used to do that, if somebody's doing that and nobody else is trying to counter them, they easily just go through it and get it all. And then it's kind of up to you to be like, well, I'll be the one to at least contend that so that you don't get everything you want every single turn just because nobody else is willing to do that. So depending on, and then of course the alliance stuff too, like if you ever get somebody that's just not going to align with you or whatever, it can really hurt the game for the gameplay above the table depending on the group. So there was just a lot of factors that could go into making this gameplay not so much fun, because then you're just countering what somebody else is doing, or you want to go to alliance but nobody will align with you, and it just, there's so many of those kind of things that can really dampen the fun of Rising Sun. So at the end of the day, I did fall out of love of it. Okay, so we're at the top three, bottom three, depending on how you look at it, of course. The fact that this is as high as it is kind of blows my mind, by the way. Bloodborne the board game, number 3 at a 7.8. Almost an 8. I don't see how that's even possible. I don't understand that, except for, and again, we're not to get into the BGG ratings, but this kind of gets into why I fell out of love with it. Except for the delivery hype and the love for the IP. It's got IP and a lot of delivery hype as a Kickstarter. And so with those two things, I feel like that rating is higher than perhaps it should be. The Bloodborne, the board game, I adore the IP. I am such a huge fan of the IP. Such a huge fan. I put this in my fundraiser this year, which of course is linked down below. Thank you so much for all the support you've had so far for that. It's been amazing. And it was probably literally the saddest thing I think I put in there. In fact, when I was gathering it up to box it up, I remember telling my wife how sad I was to do this. She's like, well, then don't do it. I was like, when was the last time we played it? And she was like, oh, yeah, good point. I was like, but man, I painted some of the minis. I love the IP. I love the idea. I love a lot of the gameplay. The card gameplay of that, I think, matches it so well. I think it's so cool. I don't even mind the, like house rules I put into it, because it has this arbitrary timer that makes no sense. Literally, it's not based off the IP at all. It actually kind of goes against the IP, which, kind of is like slow and steady progress and then fast combat, right? And like even a little bit aggressive combat because you can get your health back and stuff like that. And the card gameplay does that. The timer negates the rest of that so much. It's silly, it's arbitrary. You can see the corners cut though in the mission design. So you can have missions that are like almost impossible with the timer. Or you can have missions that, are super easy. And that's because of the random placement. It's not like they crafted scenarios here. They crafted an idea, put the start of it, and then randomized the rest. So you're randomly drawing tiles, which again doesn't match the IP very much at all, where you really learn the city, but also it's just cheap gameplay because it's guaranteeing that the game could be easy or hard depending on the random draw of the tile, because you didn't design that part of the scenario. And one of the things I think that limited this, it wasn't so much my disappointment in that, but that random draw, even if you get rid of the timer is there to keep it under control because of the rate of draw. It could be the very last tile you need, or one of the very last tiles you need. And so you're going through that, and it just becomes such a long game of going through trying to get the tile. And then, of course, you're having to fight all these other enemies and stuff like that, and it just prolongs the thing, I think, more than it needs to. And it's just so unfortunate to see a company do so well with the core gameplay, but then cheap out on the scenario creation, because obviously that would have taken more time to design and balance properly. And so instead of doing that, they just said it's not going to be balanced, it's not going to be designed well, we're just going to randomize it, call it good, ship it out. And it's so unfortunate to see that. So while I love the gameplay and had so much fun with so much of it, and I love the IP, at the end of the day, fell out of love. Okay, top 2. Number 2, 7.9, Time of Legends Joan of Arc. This was a game I absolutely loved, adored even. In fact, it was my wife's favorite game for so long. And it is so fun when you're sitting there actually playing the game. A blast. Outside of the gameplay, which sadly is not all that there is to a board game, everything else was terrible. The storage is abysmal. The setup literally would take me 3 hours. 3 hours to set this game up. That's longer than I have when I casually, while, talking with my buddy, whatever, set up my Warhammer table. And set up all the people and deploy everything, which again, that's part of the gameplay even. And again, we're having fun. We've already planned a while. This is just trying to find things. This is not fun setup. This is not, where would I put this building that make it cool or whatever. This is, I have this person and I'm trying to find it. And even with the fix, there are still issues with so much of it. And it's spread out over so many different boxes with terrible storage where minis are just in bags and you have to try and find them. And it's so bad, guys. It prevents me from loving this game. When I had it set up and I was playing it constantly, I loved it. And we played it all the time. My wife would request to play it multiple times a week. And we played a lot of this game. And it's so much fun. And that's what breaks my heart is, again, with Mythic Games, especially at this time, that so many issues with this stuff. That, there were times where it would tell you to set up stuff and it used components that didn't exist, or tell you to set up in a way that wasn't possible. The map could not be made the way that they designed it. And so then you're like, well, now I'm playing a game that may not be fair or balanced or even well designed because it's based off of my physical components and not whatever magical components they had at the time, I guess, because I don't even know how the design happened. So it sucks that a good game, 7.9 gameplay, and I do believe that, can be ruined by the difficult setup of it. But my goodness did it. So once it got packed up, I remember it was requested a few times and I said no. And I had never done that before. And I'm not sure I've ever done that since. Where they asked if I wanted to play Time of Legends. And I said no because I didn't want to set it up. Or sometimes, I remember this, we'd want to play it and we'd go for it, but we wouldn't play it until the next day because all of our game time that we had that day was for setup. 3 hours. I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't. And so as fun as this game is, as much as I enjoyed it, I fell out in love with it and I fell out hard. If somebody wants to set this game up and play with me, I would love to play with you once it's set up. Don't even bother telling me about it beforehand because I don't want to know about it hours or days before. And I don't want to do it. I don't want to tear it down and put it all back. But if the game's there and it's set up, I'll play with you gladly and love it. But until then, I actively don't want to do that. 7.9. Again, do you base it just on the gameplay or do you base it on the game? In other words, setting it up, storing it, buying it, using it. What does it look, all that tear down, and putting it all back. What does that go into the 7.9? I don't know. Finally, the number 1. This is amazing that it's as high as it is. I think it's because of the edition I picked, but I'm kind of generalizing it here. And this might surprise a lot of you guys, but again, it's how I'm defining this love. All right, now the final one breaks the entire video structure. But I think it's actually quite telling of why I fell out of love with it. This is Zombicide Season 3 Rue Morgue. It's rated at 7.5. However, and again, it kind of works, kind of doesn't. I originally had Zombicide 2nd Edition. This was the 2nd edition, and that's at an 8.0, which would put it all the way at the top. Now, I've put Zombicide as a generalized thing here, so the 8.0 matches pretty much for me just as much as the 7.5, but it also goes to show, I feel, why Zombicide is where it's at. It's been around for so long. I've had it for so long. I've played it so long that you just kind of generally fall out of love as much as before. But I think the other thing is like, do I love Zombicide? I don't think I ever have. Even in my reviews, I went back and watched them. I don't know if that would be, amazing 10 out of 10 love, right? It's just always been a lot of fun. Zombicide's just a lot of fun. but I loved playing it. Does that make sense? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Since then, I feel like there's just so many other games I would rather play. Now, it still gets played a lot. It's easy to get. And again, I did back the Deceased because I love the DC universe, and the DC storyline's a lot of fun too. So we'll see. But it also shows, again, how much it's grown from its early years. And so especially these early Zombicides, I'm not sure I'd really want to play again. They're just inherently a lot more simple, whereas the newer ones often add a lot of interesting things. Really, I think Black Plague was probably the last one, like date-wise, that really added some interesting things. And they've hit or miss before, but like I really liked Invader and the mold that they did there, and the inside and outside with the oxygen tanks and the soldiers versus civilians. And they've done so many new things and so many different flavors and variations and enhancements to the system. Yeah, they made a whole second edition that's rated at an 8.0. And so I think the newer stuff is obviously just a lot better than the older stuff. So Zombicide as a whole, I feel, might do this, but especially the older stuff, I've actively kind of fallen out of love with those, and I'd much rather play some of the newer stuff. So anyway, that's my list, guys. What would be your list? The reason I said it would be kind of difficult is because, again, defining love and why, and you can like a game but not love a game, and that's kind of hard. But if you're looking at something to cull, or if you're looking at, again, there are still more Descent, there's still more Zombicide, there's still more of so many of these games that it can help you define what you're going to be buying or not buying. Buy the stuff you love. Play the stuff you love. Focus on that. Lean into your strengths and let the weaknesses just go away, all right? Or just don't focus on it. You have limited hobby time. Don't spend it on the stuff that you've fallen out of love with. And maybe don't keep the stuff that you don't love anymore. I know we like to collect. I know it's hard to let go. Again, letting go of Bloodborne was so difficult. But at the end of the day, I don't love it anymore. So I got rid of it. Guys, thank you so much for sticking around in this channel. I know I took a bit of a break, but I am back. I'm loving it. I love making these videos for you. And hopefully you find them a little bit helpful, not just entertaining. Guys, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye, guys.